From the JAMA Network, this is JAMA Ophthalmology Author Interviews. Conversations with authors exploring the latest clinical research, reviews, and opinions featured in JAMA Ophthalmology.
Hello, and welcome to our listeners around the world. You're listening to JAMA Ophthalmology Author Interviews. Thanks for joining us. I'm Neil Bressler, Editor-in-Chief of JAMA Ophthalmology, and today we're going to look at a brief but novel report on Ultra-Widefield Optical Coherence Tomography, or OCT, beyond the Ora Serrata in Retinopathy of Prematurity, which we typically abbreviate as ROP. And joining us is the corresponding author for this report, Dr. Benjamin Young. Dr. Young is an assistant professor of ophthalmology at the Oregon Health and Science University School of Medicine in Portland, Oregon, where this device has been made, and where several of Dr. Young's co-authors have a financial interest or a patent interest in this device. Dr. Young does not have any financial interest in the device that we'll be discussing today. And I might point out that Dr. Young is on our advisory committee for JAMA Ophthalmology. Ben, thank you so much for joining us.
Neil, thanks for having me. Really excited to be here.
Ben, we already know a lot of it from your colleagues at Oregon that ultra-wide-field fundus images have really revolutionized our management of ROP. Maybe before we get into these OCTs in these neonates, you might give us a little background on how are these ultra-wide-field images now used from these cameras to diagnose ROP, give us the prognosis in ROP, or even be used to monitor ROP treatment with scatter photocoagulation or with anti-VEGF. So catch us up on how these cameras are now used in places where they have them.
Yeah, so, a lot of this work was done by the folks who preceded me up at OHSU and around the world. But, wide field fundus photography is used a lot in ROP telemedicine screening. The big benefit of that is there's limited clinicians, globally who have the skill set to diagnose and treat and screen for ROP. So deploying these wide field camera systems is really helpful to give nurses or technicians the ability to capture the images and send them to interpretation to someone else. It's also useful for clinicians who have the camera available to them to be able to take pictures, compare them from visit to visit, ask others for diagnostics, or do other things like fluorescein angiography to help define disease and decide, what to do for that neonate.
So it sounds like it's really made it easier, perhaps even better for these infants. So why look at something else? What's the potential that you were thinking about looking at ultra-wide-field OCT in ROP?
Yeah, I think to think about the potential of OCT, first we think about some limitations of the current imaging technology. So wide-field fundus photography is good, and there are good studies to show that it's essentially equivalent to an in-person exam for most things for screening for ROP. But that doesn't mean there aren't still practical issues. For one, image quality is not always the best. In the textbooks, we always have these really beautiful images that show exactly what we want to see. But then, I help with telemedicine and ROP in Oregon, and a lot of the images, in spite of really good technicians or nurses taking the pictures, have a lot of glare. There might be difficulty seeing things. Another big issue is that without scleral depression, which usually requires, a skilled clinician to do, you can't get out to the Ora, not really quite at the Ora, but out into zone 3 in the very far periphery. So you can never really completely say a neonate has completely finished growing their blood vessels just with wide field fundus photography. So those are two of the main issues with currently available wide field fundus photography. So, and that motivated our interest to look at, can we do things better, get more data, more information with the system?
So before we get into what you actually found, what are the potential advantages that you might get in terms of additive information from this ultra-wide-field OCT?
Yeah, for OCT, one really big thing is the depth information. Figuring out the staging of ROP is really dependent on figuring out how elevated their vascular borders are, basically. If their vascular borders are flat, then it'd be stage 0, stage 1. If it becomes elevated, stage 2, etc. And that's another problem with fundus photography is you only get a flat image looking at it. Even compared to clinical exam, sometimes two different clinicians will look at the same neonate. One will think, oh, it's elevated. The other won't think it's elevated. And who's to say who's right when looking at those? So I think the initial value add or the thought of the value add for OCT is making that determination more objective.
So I understand how you might get this three-dimension view to help understand if the vessels are elevated or not. You also mentioned that potentially this device might be able to get more peripheral out to the Ora Serrata or beyond. Can you give us a little more information about how that could be when we can't get it with a fundus image?
Yeah. So let me tell you a little bit first about the actual device itself. So the device investigated in the study is a contact-based ultra-widefield OCT, which has a really fast scanning laser. There's a couple novel things about this described in our group's previous studies, but that's a huge thing. And what we found surprising about it was that the intention of making it so fast, in part, was to make this tolerable for vulnerable neonates that we're doing the studies on. But because of how the optics are designed and how fast the scanning laser is moving, we were finding weird, what I initially thought were artifacts at the edge of our imaging. So we would see really dark things right at the edge of the images. And I would say, oh, that's weird. Is it something with the lens or something going on? Until we figured out we're seeing the ciliary body, which is as far out basically as you can get. And then eventually we were realizing as we were improving things like image sharpness, we were seeing the Ora Serrata in a lot of these infants. So I think the contact-based design, some of the advanced optics that are within the handheld system, and the speed of the scanning laser, we found out enabled this practical view of the Ora and beyond.
That's really cool. So do you get this all at once, or do you have to point this contact lens device in different directions to get 360-degree view of the periphery or even out to the Ora?
Right now, you do have to tilt to get different views. So in one shot, it's about 140 degrees in a single image. But if you kind of tilt and move around, you can montage to get a full Ora to Ora view of the Ora, just not in a single shot right now with the current optical design.
So this study then that you all did was to look at the feasibility of how it might work actually in these premature infants. How many infants did you actually look at with the device?
Our protocol at this point is basically to try to consent any family who has a premature baby who needs ROP screening in the NICU. So over the course of this study, which is a few months, we had 83 neonates who were consented. It was about 70% or so of all available neonates that were screened over that time for a total of 507 or so exams. So yeah, it was a decent number that we were able to screen with the device.
So when you did this feasibility study, can you give me an idea of how many neonates you were able to get such an OCT image? Was it all of them, half of them, 10% of them?
We were excited to see that every single neonate that was enrolled in this study, we could get great images on. There was no neonate where we felt that we couldn't get out peripheral enough to see disease, or had to convert to, using fundus photography or another technique to make sure that we imaged all visible disease. Another thing with the feasibility too is there were no issues with the neonates tolerating the exams. The scan time for a single full field ultra-widefield OCT was only a second, which was very practical and really comparable to wide-field fundus photography. And, even with montages and having to get different views and getting both eyes, there are babies who take less than 1 to 2 minutes to get the whole retina imaged adequately, look for disease.
Typically, would you do this after getting the fundus image, in place of getting the fundus image, or does the OCT go first? What were you doing in these feasibility studies so far?
We didn't pair this with fundus photography. Practically, it was kind of a hard sell because the OCT is also a lot more comfortable for the infants because there's no bright light. It's all infrared light. And that's part of the discussion we have with the families. We're trying to trial this to see, is it more comfortable? Is it feasible to use in these populations? We also found that the image quality was universally better with the OCTs compared to the fundus photography. So we didn't end up pairing them at all. We would do an OCT and then, if needed, do a clinical exam to confirm findings.
So would you obtain just an OCT and then a clinical exam, or were there some neonates where you got the OCT followed by a fundus image?
No, for this study, we'd only do an OCT for these infants. We would not pair them with a fundus image and didn't find that necessary because of the superior quality of the data and imaging we were getting from the OCT for the neonates.
How about going into the future? Would these places where you don't have a pediatric retina specialist available, would they be getting this OCT image? And do you envision they would then potentially need a follow-up fundus image to share through telemedicine? Or are you envisioning a day where the only thing you get are these potentially more comfortable OCT images?
Yeah, I think OCT is the future. And I think it has all the advantages and almost no disadvantages compared to fundus photography. So if I had to try to look at my crystal ball, it'd be OCT is going to be the way.
And does that mean we'll need some new classification? Not only are the residents always trying to understand this classification, but I know pediatric ophthalmologists, pediatric retina specialists are constantly thinking about the classification of ROP and the prognosis that it has and its implications for management.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the theses of my partner, Pete Campbell at OHSU's work is that all of ROP diagnostics are on a spectrum. We say like, oh, they're stage 1, they went to stage 2, but really there is, a stage 1.3 and a stage like 2.2. And I think using devices like this can help with zone, stage, and plus the components of ROP diagnostics become more quantitative and more precise and not have to fall into these different categories anymore.
So let's talk about some of the potential limitations. First of all, cost. Do we know how much this likely would cost? I know it's not commercially available now. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but assuming it's not commercially available right now, do you have any idea to just estimate, would the cost be the same as these ultra-wide-field cameras that are used in the neonates, or would it potentially be less or potentially be more?
Unfortunately, I don't know. I'm not working on the commercialization part at all. Some of the components certainly would be expensive in the version that we're using now, but I know that the team trying to look to commercialization is looking to decrease costs as much as possible and make it practical.
And to your knowledge, has this been used elsewhere in the country or the world, or is this a prototype right now and we need to have it manufactured in more than one place and tested by more than one group?
Yeah, this specific device was made by a group at OHSU that we work with, and it is a prototype. It's the only one that's out there right now. There are other groups that have made ultra-wide-field OCT systems, like at Duke. I know that they have a device that they are working on that also to commercialization. But the one that we described in the study, this specifically contact-based system, there's only one right now.
And of course, then we would have to figure out, are the outcomes any better than the fundus cameras, or is it more tolerable for either the nurses or the parents or the neonate themselves? So would those need to be tested going forward?
Yeah, we definitely have plenty of subjective feedback from the nurses, even the parents. We have a lot of parents where they're in the NICU and we are testing the camera on their neonate. And then when they go outpatient to whatever clinic, we don't have the OCT available. And when I see them or hear from them, they always say, oh, wow, the OCT was way better for my neonate. I wish that it could be available outpatient. So yeah, I do think it'd be great to get that kind of data, but subjectively at least, I think that's going to be true, that it's going to be more tolerable.
And Ben, what do you anticipate are the next steps over the next year? And then how about over the next 5 years?
The team that made this at OHSU is working towards commercialization. I think it's more than a year, kind of a timeline, but I couldn't tell you exactly how many. In terms of research, we have more than 83 infants now where we have many images over many different sessions. So we're working on developing these quantitative metrics of all the different diagnostic criteria and hopefully automating those diagnostics with things like artificial intelligence to make it more precise and less variation in diagnostics going forward.
Ben, thank you so much for sharing this information today.
Thanks for having me, Neil. It's been great being on.
I'm Neil Bressler, and I've been speaking with Dr. Benjamin Young about ultra-widefield OCT beyond the Ora Serrata in retinopathy of prematurity. You can find a link to the article in this episode's description. This episode was produced by Daniel Musisi at the JAMA Network. To follow this and other JAMA Network podcasts, please visit us online at jamanetworkaudio.com or search for the JAMA Network wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.
This content is protected by copyright by the American Medical Association with all rights reserved, including those for text and data mining, AI training, and similar technologies.